I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped onto my lawn. After 15 years of disarming explosives in war zones, you develop a sixth sense for danger. The grass looked undisturbed to the untrained eye, but I noticed the subtle differences immediately, small mounds of freshly packed dirt that hadn't been there yesterday when I left for my sister's wedding. Son of a bitch, I muttered, freezing mid-stride. Before you listen full story, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. My name's Alex Mercer. After serving 12 years as an EOD technician in the military, disarming everything from crude IEDs to sophisticated explosives across 3 continents, I'd finally settled down in the peaceful suburb of Oakwood Hills. Or so I thought. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd survived Fallujah and Kandahar only to find landmines in my front yard in suburban America. And I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. Patricia Wilkinson, or Property Line Patricia as the neighborhood called her behind her back, had been the president of our homeowners association for the past 8 years. She ruled Oakwood Hills with an iron fist and a clipboard full of violations. Her gray hair was always styled in the same severe bob, and she wore pantsuits in various shades of beige as if they were a uniform. Since I moved in 6 months ago, we'd been locked in what she probably considered war. It started with my mailbox. "This isn't regulation height," she'd said during her first inspection, measuring tape in hand. According to HOA bylaws, Section 3, Paragraph 8, all mailboxes must be between 42 and 45 inches from ground level. Yours is 46 inches. I'd smiled and nodded, planning to fix it that weekend. But before I could, she'd issued a formal violation notice with a $50 fine. Things escalated from there. My grass was half an inch too tall. My garbage bins were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. The American flag I hung on Memorial Day was oversized and obtrusive. Then came the dispute over the property line between our yards. According to Patricia, the previous owner had graciously allowed the HOA to use 3 feet of their land for a community flower bed. When I checked the deed and property survey, it was clearly my land. I gave her 2 weeks to remove the flower bed and restore my property. She'd smiled a tight, angry smile and said, "We'll see about that." I guess this was her response. Standing on my lawn, I carefully backed away to the concrete walkway and pulled out my phone. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. Without proof, it would be my word against hers. And honestly, I didn't want the neighborhood evacuated and the bomb squad trampling through my yard if I could handle this myself. First, I needed to confirm my suspicions. I went to my garage and pulled out my old gear bag, the one I'd hoped never to open again. Inside was a compact metal detector I'd kept as a souvenir and a set of basic tools. I also grabbed my tablet to document everything. The metal detector confirmed my fears within minutes. 6 distinct signatures spread across my front lawn in a pattern designed to maximize coverage of the walkways. They were small, probably homemade devices, not military grade. Patricia might have watched some YouTube videos or bought a DIY guide on the dark web, but she was an amateur. Still, amateur explosives kill just as easily as professional ones. I took photos and videos of everything: the disturbed soil, the metal detector readings, and the locations. Then I started to carefully probe around one of the devices with a thin carbon fiber rod from my kit. Based on the resistance, these weren't sophisticated, likely simple pressure plates connected to small explosive charges. Dangerous but straightforward to disarm. The absurdity of the situation hit me as I knelt there in my khakis and polo shirt, probing for landmines on my front lawn while Mrs. Henderson from across the street walked her poodle, waving cheerfully as she passed by. This was surreal. It took me 3 careful hours to expose and disarm all 6 devices. They were crude but functional, pressure-triggered explosives made from household chemicals and landscaping materials. Not powerful enough to kill, but they could have caused serious injuries, especially to children or pets who might wander onto my lawn. I preserved every one of them intact for evidence, carefully documenting the disarming process. When I was done, I had 6 defused devices laid out on a tarp in my garage and enough evidence to put Patricia away for a very long time. Now came the question, what next? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to see the look on her face when she realized her plan had failed spectacularly. But the methodical part of me, the part that had kept me alive through 248 explosive disposal operations, knew better. This required careful planning. I checked my security cameras, which I'd installed after the 3rd HOA violation notice. Sure enough, there was Patricia on the footage from 3 a.m., sneaking around my yard with a garden trowel and basket. The night vision made her look ghoulish as she carefully buried her homemade explosives, checking a crude map as she worked. The evidence was irrefutable. I called Detective Marcus Rivera, an old friend from my time providing training to the local police bomb squad. "Marcus, it's Alex Mercer. I've got a situation you're not going to believe." An hour later, Marcus stood in my garage, staring at the disarmed explosives with an expression of disbelief. "You're telling me the HOA president planted these on your lawn? Over a property dispute?" I showed him the camera footage, the property documents, and the trail of increasingly hostile violation notices. "Jesus," he muttered. "This lady's certifiable. You know we'll have to get a warrant to search her property. If she made these, she might have more." "I want to propose something else," I said, an idea forming. "What if we catch her in the act?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" The plan was simple but effective. We would replace the disarmed devices with harmless decoys equipped with GPS trackers. I would make a show of leaving town for a few days, giving Patricia the opportunity to check on her handiwork or perhaps plant more devices. The police would monitor the situation, ready to move in the moment she approached my property. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked. "We could just arrest her now." I shook my head. "She'll claim ignorance, say someone else planted them. I want there to be no doubt." The next day, I loudly packed my car while Patricia pretended to check her mail. I mentioned to another neighbor within her earshot that I was heading to a conference for 3 days. Then I drove away, but only as far as an unoccupied rental property owned by Marcus's brother 2 streets over. For 2 days nothing happened. I was beginning to think Patricia was more patient than I'd given her credit for. Then, on the 3rd morning at precisely 6:15 a.m., the GPS tracker alerted me to movement. The police surveillance team watched as Patricia, dressed in her gardening clothes, casually approached my yard with a small trowel and a soil moisture meter, a clever cover for checking on her devices. She knelt by the first decoy and carefully brushed away some soil to examine it. That's when the police moved in. The look on her face when she was surrounded by officers was something I'll never forget. Shock gave way to outrage, then to a calculating smirk. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered as they handcuffed her. "I was just checking the soil moisture for the HOA landscaping report. This is harassment." Her confident demeanor crumbled when they showed her the security footage and the disarmed explosives we'd recovered. When they searched her home, they found her workshop in the basement, complete with chemicals, wiring, and diagrams of my property marked with X's for Phase 2 of her plan. The case against Patricia Wilkinson was airtight. Attempted aggravated assault, possession of explosive devices, trespassing, and a host of other charges. The district attorney later told me they found evidence on her computer that she'd been terrorizing residents who opposed her HOA rules for years, though never to this extreme. While awaiting trial, Patricia had the audacity to send a formal HOA violation notice to my home, citing disturbed landscaping requiring immediate restoration. Her lawyer claimed temporary insanity shortly after. The judge didn't buy it. Patricia was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with psychiatric evaluation. The HOA was dissolved following an emergency neighborhood meeting where it was revealed that Patricia had been embezzling funds for years. My new neighbors are much friendlier now. We've formed a community council instead of an HOA, with transparent rules and no dictatorial powers. My mailbox remains 46 inches tall, and no one measures my grass with a ruler anymore. Sometimes I think about Patricia, wearing prison orange instead of beige pantsuits, probably organizing the inmates into committees and drafting regulations for cell decoration. Some people never change. As for me, I finally got the peaceful retirement I wanted, though I keep my EOD gear bag in the garage just in case. Old habits die hard, especially when they save your life. The property line dispute was resolved too. I turned those 3 feet of contested land into a memorial garden with a small plaque that reads, "Dedicated to those who fought for freedom from tyranny, both abroad and at home." Mrs. Henderson from across the street says it's her favorite spot in the neighborhood. I still remember the day I first noticed something was amiss on my property. After years of training my senses to detect the slightest abnormalities, a wire where it shouldn't be, a patch of dirt that seemed too fresh, civilian life hadn't dulled my instincts. Thank God for that. The neighborhood had seemed perfect when I bought the house. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and a community pool just 2 blocks away. The realtor mentioned an active HOA but assured me they were reasonable. That should have been my first warning. Within a week of moving in, I found the first violation notice taped to my door. My trash can had been visible from the street for, according to the detailed report, 14 hours and 27 minutes after collection, exceeding the 12-hour limit by 2 hours and 27 minutes. When I attended my first HOA meeting to introduce myself, Patricia had singled me out. "We welcome new residents who understand the importance of maintaining community standards," she'd said, looking directly at me. "Some people think the rules don't apply to them. Those people find Oakwood Hills challenging." I'd smiled politely, thinking she was just establishing her authority. I didn't realize she was declaring war. The next few months were a flurry of violation notices, each more nitpicky than the last. My holiday lights were too bright. My garden hose wasn't properly stored. The wreath on my door contained non-approved seasonal materials. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that I'd just spent 12 years serving our country and was still adjusting to civilian life. Her response was cold. "The rules apply equally to everyone, Mr. Mercer. Your previous employment doesn't entitle you to special treatment." The breaking point came when she had my car towed from my own driveway because it had been immobile for more than 48 hours, indicating it might be abandoned. I had been visiting my mother in the hospital. When I returned to find my car gone and a $280 towing fee to pay, something snapped. I marched over to Patricia's house, violation notices in hand, ready for confrontation. She opened the door wearing gardening gloves, despite the fact that her yard work was all done by the HOA-approved landscaping service. "Mr. Mercer, this is highly inappropriate. If you have concerns, please submit them in writing to the board." "The property line marker between our yards," I said, cutting to the chase. "It's been moved 3 feet onto my property." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "That flower bed has been maintained by the HOA for over a decade. Perhaps your property assessment is incorrect." "I had it surveyed yesterday," I replied, pulling out the official document. "That's my land and I want it back." Her smile could have frosted glass. "We'll discuss this at the next board meeting." "In 6 weeks." "No, we won't. You have 2 weeks to remove the flower bed and restore my property. After that, I'll remove it myself and bill the HOA for my time and materials." As I walked away, I heard her call after me, "You really don't want to make an enemy of me, Mr. Mercer?" I didn't think much of it at the time. People make threats when they're angry. But most people don't follow through with landmines. Looking back at the security footage after her arrest, I could trace her progression from petty tyranny to outright criminal behavior. The night after our confrontation, she was visible on camera, measuring my property line. 3 days later, she was photographing my yard from different angles. In the week before she planted the explosives, she made 4 nighttime visits to my property, testing the soil and marking locations. The planning was methodical, which made it all the more disturbing. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was calculated. Patricia had decided that I needed to be taught a lesson, one that would send a message to the entire neighborhood. What she hadn't counted on was that I'd spent my career learning how people think when they plant explosives. While waiting for her trial to begin, I received countless calls from neighbors sharing their own Patricia stories. She'd killed Mrs. Abernathy's prize roses with herbicide after a dispute about fence height. She'd slashed the tires of Mr. DeMarco's RV when he parked it in his driveway overnight to load for a family trip. And most disturbing of all, she'd poisoned at least 3 neighborhood dogs who had urinated on her immaculate lawn. But no one had stood up to her before. Fear and complacency had allowed her to become a suburban warlord, ruling through intimidation and bureaucracy. The day of her sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched as she entered in handcuffs, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Her lawyer had advised her to appear remorseful, but the hatred in her eyes when she looked at me told the true story. The judge was unimpressed by her claims of community service and previously spotless record. "Mrs. Wilkinson, you used your position of authority to conduct a campaign of intimidation and ultimately attempted to cause serious bodily harm to a member of your community. The premeditated nature of your actions and your continued attempts to justify them indicate that you pose a danger to society." Patricia received 8 years with the possibility of parole after 5, plus mandatory psychiatric treatment and a permanent restraining order preventing her from ever returning to Oakwood Hills. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. "This isn't over," she mouthed. But it was over. The new community council established after the HOA's dissolution created reasonable guidelines that focused on community well-being rather than rigid conformity. The neighborhood flourished without Patricia's iron rule. 6 months after her sentencing, I received a letter from the prison psychiatrist treating Patricia. He wanted to understand more about our conflict to help with her therapy. In his professional opinion, Patricia suffered from a personality disorder exacerbated by the small amount of power she'd been given as HOA president. In different circumstances, he wrote, she might have been merely difficult rather than dangerous. The combination of authority without accountability created a perfect environment for her condition to worsen. I thought about that a lot. How thin the line can be between order and tyranny, between rules that serve the community and rules that serve the rulemaker. A year after moving in, I finally had the peaceful home I dreamed about during long nights in dangerous places. My yard was exactly as I wanted it, with no measuring tape-wielding inspectors critiquing my choices. The flower bed that had caused so much conflict became a vegetable garden that produced enough tomatoes and zucchini to share with the entire street. Occasionally, new residents would ask about the landmine incident, now a neighborhood legend. I'd downplay it, uncomfortable with being seen as some kind of suburban hero. I hadn't done anything special, just used the skills I had when I needed them. One evening, as I sat on my front porch enjoying a cold beer, Mrs. Henderson from across the street came over with a plate of cookies. "I never properly thanked you," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "For what?" "For standing up to her. My Winston," her voice caught as she mentioned her late Labrador. "He was the second dog she poisoned. I knew it was her, but I couldn't prove it. I was too scared to confront her. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded." "We all were," she continued. "Scared of violation notices, scared of fines, scared of being ostracized in our own neighborhood. It sounds silly now, but it didn't feel silly then." "Fear rarely does," I replied, thinking of young soldiers I'd trained, facing their first IED disposal. "Fear is only silly in retrospect." "Well, anyway, thank you." She patted my hand and stood to leave. "The Community Garden Committee is meeting Thursday if you'd like to join." I smiled. "I might do that." I never expected to use my EOD training in civilian life, and certainly not in my own front yard. But I've come to realize that threats come in many forms and courage is needed everywhere, not just on battlefields far from home, but also in quiet neighborhoods where tyranny can grow unnoticed until someone decides enough is enough. Patricia's story is a cautionary tale about power corrupting and the dangers of giving authority to the wrong people. My story is simpler. Sometimes the skills that keep you alive in one world save you in another. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivers poetic justice. A would-be bomber targeting the one person on the street who could disarm her pathetic attempts with their eyes closed. Life has a sense of humor, even if Patricia Wilkinson doesn't.